We've been experiencing a series of retrogrades in Cancer, reviewing these themes collectively. Cancer rules the subconscious, our emotional security, and our intuitive knowing. It rules our home life and our ancestry, our food and crops, the environment around us, especially our waterways. But for the second Jupiter cycle in a row, Mercury and Jupiter have bypassed a meeting in Cancer. Because Mercury, the intellect, and Jupiter, wisdom, bypass their meeting here, the collective is denied a reset button of these themes. There is no easy intellectual framework, Mercury, or ideological solve, Jupiter, to solve our collective issues around belonging, our sense of home, themes around ancestry and immigration, our rapidly changing environment, and our emotional safety. It creates a cultural landscape where logic, Mercury, and growth or wisdom, Jupiter, feels starkly separated from care, empathy, and nurturing, Cancer. We may have difficulties uniting around a shared ancestry or homeland. This is a theme that is baked into the founding of our country. An emotional secure union based on a shared identity is not a term that I would ever use to describe us. We find our sense of belonging by celebrating and making the best use of our differences. We find our sense of belonging in our individual sovereignty. Mars's retrograde cycle through gate 62, the gate of details, backing up into gate 53, the gate of new beginnings, marked the intense power shifts that began as soon as Trump took office. The complete destruction of governmental expertise and structures that had been set up in prior administrations, immigration crackdowns, and sweeping tariffs. Jupiter's retrograde cycle in this same gate expanded these themes, beginning with domestic standoffs, expanding into regional buildups, and then a considerable overreach with the launch of the Iran war. And finally, we're getting a chance to process these changes with the Mercury retrograde cycle transiting the same degrees and through the same gates. Mercury's retrograde cycle began during a fragile ceasefire right before this full moon in Capricorn, as the court handed down verdicts that reined in certain avenues of constitutional overreach, like mail-in voting and birthright citizenship, but handed the president and the Republican Party more power to shape the government in ways aligning with corporate interests. Mercury went retrograde just before meeting up with Jupiter in Cancer. Mercury and Jupiter will not meet up in Cancer during this 12-year cycle, like I mentioned. And this is the second Jupiter cycle. They've skipped a conjunction in Cancer. The last time they met up in Cancer was in 2002, and they won't meet up in Cancer again until 2037, when Uranus will also be in Cancer. This skipping Cancer twice is a relatively rare occurrence. Going back to 1700, I found that Mercury and Jupiter did skip Cancer twice, but not consecutively. The first time they skipped meeting Cancer in the middle of Jupiter's 12-year cycle was in 1776, the year we signed the Declaration of Independence. In May of 1776, just months before the signing, Mercury met up with the Jupiter in late Gemini. Then Mercury rushed right ahead into Cancer and stationed retrograde a few days before the signing. The next time they meet up is a year later, and it's in Leo, right next to the Sibley's North Node. So, like I mentioned, this skipped conjunction is baked into the identity of our country. On a recent Lawless Astrology interview with Ronnie Pontiac, Ronnie referred to the US as a split personality, which I thought was a great way to describe this skipped conjunction. It makes sense, right? We were founded by a mix of dissidents seeking freedom from the repression of a monarchy who is abusing their power. The founders were initially so scared to recreate the monarchy that they initially put together a very weak governmental structure, which only included articles of confederation and complete veto power by any state in the Union. This weak structure did not end up working very well and led to a rebellion. So by the time Mercury and Jupiter met up in Cancer again, they ratified the Constitutional Convention, whose framework we directionally follow today. The next time I found that Mercury and Jupiter skipped Cancer in its 12-year cycle was in 1835. In 1835, Mercury and Jupiter conjunct at 19 degrees of Gemini. And in 1836, it skipped to a conjunction in Leo. This time period was called the Age of Jackson, which was kicked off by the controversial 1824 corrupt bargain election. The core of the Age of Jackson was built on a pact to unify Northern workers and Southern planters into one Democratic Party by keeping the controversial issue of slavery completely out of national politics. This era saw the destruction of the old caucus system, the expansion of voting rights for white men, and the rise of the Democratic Party, which later morphed into the Republican Party. This temporary unification did not last long. By 1848, when Mercury and Jupiter met up at 29 degrees of Cancer, while Mercury was retrograde, that pact exploded. Following the Mexican-American War, the U.S. gained a massive new tract of land in the West. So the burning question became, will slavery be allowed to expand into these new territories? When the mainstream Democratic Party refused to ban slavery in the West, a massive group of anti-slavery Northern Democrats revolted. So basically, this skipped Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer symbolizes a temporary or shallow unification that is followed by a revolt or backlash that eventually leads to a revision. It is symbolic of social fracturing amidst economic and technological change, including a crisis of federal power. So again, we have been experiencing a similar type of social fracturing and crisis of federal power since Obama's election. But now we're experiencing this for a second cycle in a row with President Trump's rise to power. And you see that fracturing has intensified, which makes sense because of the larger demographic shifts we are experiencing right now. Those who favor a white majority rule realize they will have to take desperate measures to remain in power. Trump built a temporary and fragile coalition based on an illusion of MAGA ideals. As the two other periods have shown us, this unification is already starting to fray. But we have another Jupiter cycle before we will see a unification. And that unification brings with it a larger societal change with Uranus's ingress into Cancer. Mercury will turn direct on July the 23rd in gate 53. So we are revisiting the new cycle that we've been attempting to start, hoping it will be successful this time. This happens on the cross of laws, Netanyahu's cross. You see the sun is in the last line of gate 56, and Netanyahu has his design sun in line 4. Serendipitously, he's slated to visit the United States next week for Lindsey Graham's funeral, and he'll most likely meet Trump while he is here. Only a few days later, on July the 26th, Saturn will turn retrograde and the nodes will transition into the Leo-Aquarius axis. The North Node enters gate 30, the gate of fantasy and fate, connecting Pluto in gate 41, the gate of contraction, which creates this channel of recognition. This channel symbolizes a deep longing for our fantasies to come true. And while we may move in the direction of that longing, what actually happens is largely dependent upon fate. The February eclipse was also in gate 30, connecting Pluto to activate the channel of recognition. It was only a few days later that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction happened. That Saturn-Neptune conjunction happened with the sun highlighting gate 55, the gate where the North Node is now transitioning out of. And 6 days after this conjunction, on February the 26th, Mercury stationed retrograde in Pisces. And 2 days later, we attacked Iran, just as Mars hit the February eclipse degree. So now we are seeing a reverse pattern as we are approaching the August eclipse, which basically happens on the opposite side in Leo. And it is going to connect this channel of recognition once again. Let's review some of the themes we are returning to from a different perspective. It was during this February eclipse that Anthropic released its AI agents, resulting in a steep drop in tech stocks as a result. So this was a prime example of the channel of recognition playing out. There was a contraction at one end for the purposes of growth at the other. When we are moving toward a future fantasy, we have to focus all of our energy on that future. And that means a contraction on the other side, a contraction of all of the other distractions that we have been pouring our energy and focus into. It means a contraction of our old life, basically. We have to slow down. We have to release that old life so we can focus on this new life. On the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Supreme Court released their ruling that Trump's unilateral tariffs were illegal. And that night, Trump railed against the Supreme Court for this decision. You can see this in the astrological chart with Jupiter retrograde in the second house and Mars on the midheaven. Mars is also symbolic of the upcoming attack on Iran, which happened, like I mentioned, as soon as Mars hit the eclipse degree. Now, I haven't heard too many people talk about the oddity of an attack like this happening on a Mercury retrograde, but I suppose it's symbolic of this administration's approach, since this wasn't our first surprise attack on Iran during the negotiation process. And interestingly enough, it is on the cross of migration, which is all about this need to diversify and to go into new areas and to break up the old world order. When Mercury stationed direct on March the 20th, the attacks intensified. And you can see this with Mercury on the North Node, with Mars in the 8th house. Now we're seeing similar themes as we relaunch the attacks during a Mercury retrograde. But things have shifted. You see that Mercury is now with Jupiter in the 8th house, and it's in between the Sun, still in Cancer, and Jupiter now in Leo. So we've seen a tremendous backlash against this war and against AI companies and their data centers. AI companies are not only burning through a lot of cash, but they are also hogging up a lot of our shared resources. And this is only intensifying as energy prices and inflation rises because of this war. As a result, AI companies are experiencing a drop in confidence with both consumers and investors. This is especially apparent with the performance of the SpaceX IPO, which is now under its IPO price, and the huge drop in Oracle stock, which is a bellwether for OpenAI's performance. And we've started to see shifting investments out of AI models and into AI infrastructure. But there are some concerns as to whether there is enough demand that warrants the current investment. I think this is partially due to a misdirection of goals. The AI infrastructure is not simply about supporting individual company growth and efficiency. It's more about competing with China for control of the cloud. It's being strategically targeted for defense and mass surveillance. If you can create enough of a surveillance ecosystem, you're less likely to have dissidents. And this will eventually feed into the larger business ecosystem built on a control grid. When Mercury turns direct, we may see the opposite to what we saw last time. Mars will have just entered gate 45, applying to the United States natal Mars and the president's Uranus and North Node degree. This gate is all about maintaining material leadership, our leadership of the petrodollar. And Mars is connecting to Saturn in gate 21, the gate of control. Astrologically, Mars and Saturn are in a sextile to one another. There is an opportunity here for Mars and Saturn to work together. Together, they create this money channel. And this is a channel that Trump has in his individual design chart. And people who have this channel, like the president, basically have themes around money. Now, that could be an opportunity to make money, but it's not always making money because of this sextile. You can also have money problems with this channel. And we know that Trump has a history of losing money just as fast as he makes it. Money themes connecting Mars and Saturn is not really a good sign because Mars and Saturn are both destructive forces, and Saturn is in the sign of Mars's exaltation. So Mars will be the ruler in this situation. Mars's weakness in Gemini is that it is frenetic and operating in too many places at once. It has its hand in too many pots. Saturn has been moving very slowly. In fact, it has been at 14 degrees of Aries since June the 27th. Now it's basically stopped. But even though it is turning directions and moving backwards starting July the 26th on the cross of the unexpected, it will remain at this 14 degrees through eclipse season. This is directly opposite of the United States Saturn degree. So we will likely see increasing inflation and most possibly a global recession, especially as our oil reserves are depleted. But Lindsey Graham's death last week is a helpful reminder that acts of fate can completely change our direction in the blink of an eye. All of the positive buzz around Barbot's basket may be indicative of this kind of shift. We also have to remember that because of our unique place in the world, we might have a limited perspective of what that kind of shift can mean for the rest of the world. We in the United States have been part of the imbalance in the rest of the world, and now we are experiencing a rebalancing. What might be disastrous for one person or country can be a boon for another person or country. For example, Cory Doctorow wrote about various third world countries receiving a windfall of cheap green energy when Trump discontinued green energy subsidies for the United States. So now that we're really running low on fossil fuels, they'll be saved or they'll be helped in this time of very low energy reserves. We desperately need a new model to follow that isn't based on this out of control consumption that we have been modeling for the rest of the world. We've reached our limit and something must give. Now, hopefully, that doesn't mean everyone adopts a controlling, authoritarian model, but that we build a new model that is both egalitarian and based on reciprocity with the rest of the world. There are signs of optimism, not only in that harmonic Barboats basket, but the upcoming eclipse has themes that involve breaking out of a very negative situation where no hope can be seen to a more positive space containing many options. So I hope this video helps you hold on to some hope that even though things look very dire at this moment, they won't always look this way. And hopefully they'll look much better than they have been for a while. I know it will take time, but as we're approaching the eclipse, I'm hopeful that things will start to change for the better. That's it for me now. I'll see you next time. Bye.